And we're back. Welcome, everyone. Welcome if you are new. Um, a quick update on the channel. I've been reading episodes from a story. It's really becoming a novella, maybe, about uh, how people reform themselves after a generalized collapse of industrialized civilization. So we're up to episode three. Check it out in my live content. Um, it's a work in progress, and I'm using these readings as a chance to listen to myself uh, speak the story because it's it's a good method of editing if you don't have an editor or a reader or you're just kind of doing it yourself. Pro tip: it's kind of useful to read your own work and then listen to it as is being, you know, as you're reading it. Just listen to it as an audiobook, and you catch things. You catch continuity issues and awkward sentence structures and things like that. So I'm just kind of doing that here, and at the same time, I'm putting it up for you people to enjoy. And definitely, if you listen to the story and you have comments about the content or the direction it's headed, or questions about things, or if you notice continuity problems, go ahead and leave a comment. Appreciate any input, and regardless whether you leave comments or not, I hope you enjoy the story. So I'm enjoying writing it. I think we're up to day 46 now, and of course, there's going to be 100. And the story is getting deeper and more complicated as I go. So the writing is taking quite a bit of time, but that's good. It should, as you might well imagine. So that's what I've been doing. And on the topic of um, listening to my own thoughts, basically read back to me. I was listening to a documentary. It seemed like it might have been an old one, but I didn't look up the date, and I was listening to it on YouTube, and one of the featured speakers, it was done in an interview format, like journalism, right? So it's like journalism and an interview format where they were interviewing all these different people who had thoughts about global heating, climate change, and all of that from a social and scientific perspective. And one of the guests, who was getting actually a lot of time in the documentary, was Michael Oppenheimer. Uh, Not related to J. Robert Oppenheimer of the movie. So this is a different Oppenheimer. He's a climate scientist and high mucky muck in the climate science community, and that's fine. I've heard his stuff before. He's a really thoughtful and cogent uh, speaker to the subject matter, and I always enjoy his stuff. And I was enjoying listening to him in this documentary along with the other speakers. It was actually really well done. But that's not the point. The point is he was speaking, he was talking, and he was addressing what we should be able to anticipate as being the impacts of climate change, which is what people generally call it, climate change. They don't call it global heating. That's the physics of it. I really like sticking to the physics because I think the physics are a bigger problem than climate change, and I think we should really be addressing the problem, not the effects so much, but the actual problem itself. Because, uh, well, the effects are going to be all over the place. And he was saying, in terms of effects, he said something like, and it's kind of a throwaway comment. I've said it, and I've heard other people say it, but when he said it, for some reason, and I think I know the reason. I'll address this in a moment. When he said it, my whole brain just sort of pivoted. I was like, oh wait, that's not true. I've said that. I've heard other people say that, and he just said it, but for some reason, I know the reason. Uh, it's not correct. What he said was unarguable for most people. What he said was that, in terms of effects of global climate change, we should expect dry places to get drier and wet places to get wetter. And that's when I actually paused the video. I paused the video right there, and I didn't actually watch the rest of it because that really struck me. That struck me just how incorrect that is. And I'm not slamming Michael Oppenheimer. In fact, for all I know, he doesn't even say that kind of thing anymore. I certainly wouldn't at this point. I know I wouldn't because I know better, and maybe even he does. And that may have been even an old documentary. It had that kind of look to it, like maybe it was 5 years old or something. But we can't say things like that. We can't say things like that. Yes, this is now this is self-editing. Okay, we're self-censoring. We can't say things like that. Not because they're politically incorrect or they're woke or whatever. We can't say things like that because they are scientifically incorrect. Okay, and a lot of my recent videos, I've been coming down on statements and uh, 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 various comments that are scientifically inaccurate. And not that this person's opinion is wrong and they're woke or they're alt right or they're in denial or something like that. That's not it at all. I'm not talking about people's belief systems or how well they're coping with all this. What I'm talking about is just the accuracy of statements. And he was saying, well, under a global heating regime, drier places will get drier and wet places will get wetter. And it just went through my brain like lightning. It's like, oh no, that's not true. He just said that. And I've said that. And I realize it's not true. You can't say that. Here's why. There is an aspect of this that is denial. I've gotten really sensitive to what I call soft denial or non-denial denial or you know denial edging or something like that. And the reason why it's denial is this: we have to be really, really careful with this. Okay, we're all doing it. I know I've done it. I'm not doing it anymore, but I know I've done it. Here's the problem with that statement: nobody lives in dry places. Anybody on the internet who's going to hear Michael Oppenheimer or me or anyone else say, dry places are going to get drier. That's actually good news for most people who listen to YouTube. That's great news because they're not living in dry places as a rule. I mean, okay, I guess there's some people living in Arizona and New Mexico who might be a little nervous about that. But by and large, do we think that people in Saudi Arabia are watching YouTube and listening to climate change videos? No. Or climate change scientists? No. Do we think that, even the people of Arizona really are listening to climate change videos on YouTube? No. People who live in dry areas are perfectly happy living in dry areas. And they're probably accustomed to dry areas getting drier, but there aren't many people who do that. So if you come out and say, well, climate change is going to be really bad because dry areas are going to get drier, most people will say, uh-huh, yeah, okay. Well, that's too bad for them. Why would anyone want to live in a dry area? Get out. I mean, that's going to be their approach, right? They're not going to be like, "Oh my God, the dry people are going to be dry, and it's so terrible." Most people would just simply say, "Oh, dry places get drier. Yeah, okay." I guess the snakes will care. The scorpions, right? Scorpions will notice, but the rest of us, whatever. And then the other side of the same coin is, wet places will get wetter, and there's a good scientific thinking for both of those. But once again, wet places getting wetter. I don't who lives in wet places? What, rainforests? Southeast Asia? They're not watching YouTube videos. They're not having existential angst and dread about their wet place getting wetter. And, if you live in a wet place and you're kind of accustomed to wetness and it rains a lot, rains what, 500 inches a year or 400 inches a year, it's gonna get a little wetter. It's gonna get, what, 600 inches a year of rain. Hey, you cope, right? Your house is already on still. Well, even the animals are probably mostly swimming half the time, so a little more water, wet places getting wetter, meh, okay, it's fine. They'll increase umbrella sales or something, right? Plastic ponchos will be a premium. Wet places getting wetter. Okay, fine. Nobody lives in a wet place. So it appeals the whole statement, end to end, appeals to a sense of normalcy bias because no one thinks they live in these places. And if you try to appeal to the average American or the average European or the average Asian and say, "Yeah, dry places are gonna get drier and really wet places are gonna get even wetter," then you're gonna say, "Okay, fine. Doesn't affect me. I have perfect weather here. It's never dry, it's never wet, it's always the same, so I guess it's gonna be more of the samer. It's gonna be samer, even more normal. My weather's gonna get what? More normal? My weather's already normal. It just becomes super normal? Okay, fine. Drier, wetter, and normaler. Okay, fine." So it is a kind of what I call soft denial. It's not denying that climate change is gonna make effects. It's saying, "Oh, well, there are gonna be effects at this extreme and that extreme, and, hey, most of us that are watching this video and driving and flying and going going to Disneyland, and we're right here in the middle, so we don't do we care? Should we care? Maybe there's some social justice or equity issues, right? The wet people and the dry people are gonna be suffering and, well, okay, how many people is that? 100,000,000, 10,000,000, 5,000,000? Is it worth ending civilization so they don't have a bad day? And so you can kinda walk away. So that's that there is a problem with saying that, and it would even be a problem in the way I just described that allows people in the middle, which is what, 90%, right, of the people to kinda walk away. That by itself would be a problem. If you just encourage people to shrug and say, "Okay, the dry people, will, we'll send them some bottled water, and the wet people will send them umbrellas. Problem solved, right? Okay, and you just allow them to walk away. So that's a problem right there. The bigger problem with that statement, the wet, dry places get drier, wet places get wetter. Even though I'm sure that's going to happen some places, the real problem with that statement is it's just not true. It's anti-science. The science, the data. Let's just talk about that. The data of about climate change doesn't support that. Turn this light on. That's better. The data doesn't support that. Examples, Hawaii. Hawaii, tropical paradise, coconut palms, lush, jungles growing up the size of volcanoes and, you know, grow right down to the beaches and the black sand and the water, you know, Hawaii is drying up. Hawaii is right out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean surrounded by hot water, should be getting they get hurricanes once in a while, just like Florida does, should be getting lots of rain. They're drying up. That's a wet place, getting drier, wet place getting drier. And I don't and maybe you haven't noticed because you kinda have to go looking for it, but there's been a lot of reporting out of the Arabian Peninsula. So that's Saudi Arabia, um, Jordan, Yemen, Oman, UAE, that bunch, right? There's been reporting coming out of the Arabian Peninsula that shows hail the size of tennis balls and torrential rains and floods, torrential floods washing away entire parking lots full of cars and surrounding cities, people getting trapped on islands, essentially, around which all this water is flowing. And maybe it's always that way in Saudi Arabia, but they're reporting it like it's a phenomenon. They're reporting it like it's, you know, uh, the hand of God or something. Completely unprepared. And, this is one of the richest countries on the planet. They got, Saudi Arabia has all the money in the world. They can do anything they want. They can't do anything with these floods. And these hail and the hail is so big, it bashes all the cars, destroys all the cars on the road, bashes all the windows out, bashes the hoods in and the tops, demolishes them. And I don't think they're used to that. I don't think that's their life. This is Saudi Arabia. It's sand, right? Scorpions, hail, and rain, and thunderstorms, lightning. What is going on? I would think that's a dry place. I should think it would get drier, but it's not. Other examples, the Amazon rainforest. It's right there in the name, rainforest, all right? The Amazon rainforest is drying up. Parts of it, the Amazon has lots of problems. Okay, let's face it. The Amazon is being clear cut to make temporary land available for farming. They're exporting a lot of food, mostly to China, almost entirely to China, the rest of Asia. Uh, Beef, pork, soybeans, uh, wheat, a bunch of other things, and they just set fire to the forest. And they clear the forest, and then they get to the rich soil. But if you study, the biology of rainforest, as I have, then you know that that soil is only about 12 inches deep, and then it's bedrock out under that. So these are very shallow soils because it rains all the time. It's a rainforest, it rains all the time, and the amount of productivity, the amount of churn going through the detritus layer is so hot, so vigorous that everything that falls from the trees, the branches, the fruits, the leaves, is immediately combusted and turned right into carbon dioxide. And it's just the environment is so hot, biologically speaking. It's so hot that there is no soil. Soil just never develops. Everything is in the trees, really. The trees are the soil. That's hard to imagine, I know, but the trees are the soil. There are plants that grow in the bark of trees. There are animals that never come down from the trees. There are animals that live in the very top of the trees, so that everything below them is tree. The trees are like the soil itself, and they're clearing the trees. And as a consequence, um, the the Amazon is disappearing under this clear cut. But more importantly, the Amazon itself, the trees that are left are drying up. They're drying up, and the whole thing is expected to be in terminal decline anytime, if not already. The predictions are that the Amazon rainforest could be completely replaced by a savanna, which is more of a dry, drought-tolerant, environment. And savannas and similar assemblages of drought-tolerant plants are frequently found in stony, rocky areas, right? So you go to, Utah, and you go out there in the beautiful, high plateaus and the deserts out there, and, you'll find plants growing inside the cracks of rocks and whatnot, or in the bottom of a stream that sometimes gets rainfall, but for the most part, there's not much there. There's chaparral, there's mesquite, there's, buckbrush, and these are drought-tolerant plants that get no taller than a house and are pretty scattered, and there's grasses, and the animals that live there eat the grasses, and, there's not much there. It's a savanna, typified with drought-tolerant species. So that's what's happening in the Amazon. It's drying up. And where'd the water go? Well, to some extent, the trees, again, not only are the trees the soil, but the trees make the rain. But under a paradigm of global heating, everything gets turned on its head. So the Amazon is drying up and turning into a savanna, and it's probably in terminal decline. Um, a, a headline that came across the transom last week: Bogota, Colombia. I don't know anything about Colombia, but I learned a little something in this news feed. Bogota, Colombia, which it lives up at 8,500 feet on a plateau, 8,500 feet up. It's in a rainforest. When you're on top of a mountain, you don't have rivers to speak of, because the rivers are down in the valleys, right? The rain falls on the mountains, and then it makes its way down the sides of the mountains, and the rivers are in the valleys. So, Bogota, Colombia, which how did this happen? An interesting history, I'm sure, is on top of this high plateau, and they don't have rivers; they have reservoirs. It's flat enough that the water can accumulate in natural depressions, and those reservoirs are where they get their water. And that actually works for them because that high plateau is a rainforest. However, it's not working for them anymore because, the last decade or so, but really transitioning over more than, 1 decade or so, is it's been getting drier up there in on the plateau. It wasn't a problem before now, right? How long have Colombians been living on that plateau? Thousands of years? Who knows? Probably. And now there's not enough rain to keep the reservoirs full, and the reservoirs are at like 20%. So here was a wet place that dried up. They didn't get wetter, they dried up. The UK, which well, we don't associate the UK with being dry, it's generally kind of wet. They've been having storms, huge monumental storms coming ashore. Their weather is typified with, you know, foggy, rainy. Now they're having enormous storms. So I guess that does mean they're getting wetter, but they're not getting weather the way they might thought they were gonna get wetter, like the rain would come more often, the rain would be a little harder. They're getting named storms. They had, like, 11 so far this year, and these storms are just horrendous. It's destroying ships, they're destroying crops, blowing the roofs off of people's houses. They're unbelievable. Here's a country that's been in place for thousands of years, right? How long have people lived in this area? A lot longer than they lived in the US, right? Because they came to the US from there when that country wasn't even young anymore. And so, the UK, England, right, Britannia, has a long history, and they know what their history is, and these storms are coming along, and they're gobsmacked. Like, "What is this? Another one? When is it gonna stop?" People over there are saying that. "When is this going to end?" Well, it may not end, okay? So the somewhat instinctive, sensible, common sense approach that because it's gonna get hot because of the greenhouse effect. So that means that hot places are gonna get hotter. Fair enough. And hot places are usually dry. So that means dry places get hotter and get drier. So you can kinda string this together in your head, right? You kinda, okay." And then, well, of course, we associate really wet areas with being really hot and humid, so when they get hot, they'll be even more humid and more rainier and more rainforesty, so wet places get wetter, right? I can see that. That makes sense. But this is not true, and the data doesn't support it. Data One thing the data does support is that places are getting hotter. It's called global heating. We can stop calling it global warming. Okay, we just knock that off. It's global heating. It's getting hot. Warm might even be tolerable, but this heat is becoming lethal. It's dangerous amounts of heat. So let's just call it global heating, shall we? Now, when the globe heats, it's going to have an impact on weather. Why is that? Weather arrives in your location on the wind. The winds blow in the weather. There aren't too many places. There are some places that make their own weather. There are some places that do make their own weather, and provided that nothing else changes, that's their weather because they're making their own weather. Uh, monsoons, for example. India has monsoons. Southeast Asia, where I used to live, has monsoon season, and it's a dance between the land and the sea and the differential temperatures and the daytime heating and the nighttime cooling, and they just get into this rhythm that in the monsoon season, the rains just come and go and come and go, and it's rhythmic and predictable. And I don't know if this is true. I was young at the time, but it seemed to me that when I lived in Bangkok, in the rainy season, it rained every single day at 3 p.m. local time. 3 PM, it rained, and it came down in buckets. I mean, it was stinging rain. The rain would come down so hard that the parking lots would fill up with water. There'd, like, be 6 inches of water in the parking lot. And the fish, and I remember this, the fish would come out of the streams, and they're everywhere. Bangkok, Thailand is basically built on a, delta. I think it's the Mekong River, and it comes down and it spreads out like deltas do, and the city was built on the high parts of the delta, and then the meandering network of rivers and streams went around these high spots, and when they built the city up, when they built it up, they just channelized all these little streams that went through the delta on their way to the sea, and they called them klongs, and they were a permanent feature. They never went away, except when it rained, they would fill up, and you'd expect that, local flooding. The klongs would fill up and overflow. It was no big deal. And the fish would come out of the clogs and they'd swim around in the parking lot, not even joking. And they'd eat stuff. They'd eat insects. They'd eat snakes. They'd eat bugs and scorpions. And then, and these are big fish. And then, as the water began to recede, they would swim back into the clogs and they had their meal. And this happened. It seemed to me like every day at like 3 p.m. And people would, stop what they're doing and huddle under a newspaper or an umbrella or get under an awning and just kind of wait for it to happen and wait for it to be done. And because the rain would fall so hard that you couldn't really be in it, it would kind of pummel you. And I'm not sure why I'm telling you this story, but I remember now why I'm telling this story. There are some places that make their own weather, and the weather in Bangkok and probably Southeast Asia as a whole, and certainly India, parts of India. There's this monsoon weather that it's a dance between the land and the sea, and the land and the sea. The monsoon rains come in, and they rain like a son of a gun for half an hour, 20 minutes, and then they leave. And there are some places that make their own weather, and those places know who they are. The rest of us, our weather is blown in on the wind. Weather is blown in on the wind, and it can make a big difference to your experience of the weather, of which direction the wind is blowing from. So, for example, the city of Portland in the state of Oregon, Portland, Oregon, had a record-breaking heat wave. It was so hot, so anomalously hot. In Portland, quick digression, Portland, Oregon is famous for its fog and its rain, kind of like Seattle, right? So these are wet places in the Pacific Northwest. They get a lot of dew and a lot of fog, and they're wet all the time. And the fog doesn't go away for days at a time. And then you'll get a sunny day, and it'll be foggy again. And then it rains, and it rains 9 months out of the year to listen to those people talk about it. So, but on this occasion, and it wasn't that long ago, look it up, uh, Oregon record heat wave at Portland. It got to something like 116 degrees, 116 degrees, as opposed to the usual 70, right? 116 degrees or so. And the reason why it did was because the wind shifted. The wind used to blow in from the Pacific, and it would bring the fog and the cold air from the Pacific. It's cold up there. This is ice cream water coming from Alaska. So it would blow over the sea and onto the land, and it would carry the cold water and the fog onto the land. Well, the wind reversed, and it started coming from the other end. It kept coming from the east, and it was blowing across the dry, hot interior of and on into Idaho, and it blew hot air in to Portland and blew the cold air and the fog out to sea. You see, it came from a different direction. And it did that for a few days, and it was really hot. And so they're normally expecting 70, 75 degrees. And then this 110, 115-degree weather was blown in on the wind. And so what you have to understand is that the change that global heating is going to make, and this is not climate change. This is where we can't talk about climate change. Yeah, your climate might change, but that's not what happened in Portland, Oregon that on that occasion for that particular week. That was not climate change. That was global heating changing their weather. And this is absolutely critical that everyone understand this. The problem is not climate change. Yeah, your climate might change, but that's not what's going to kill you. What's going to kill you is you're used to 70 degrees and all of a sudden it's 120. That's what's going to murder you. A 50-degree swing in temperature in 5 days. 50 degrees Fahrenheit swing in temperature. So we don't talk about climate change. This is a non-issue. Maybe your climate will change and maybe it'll take 50 years or 100, but like with the Amazon turning into savanna, yeah, that'll be a big deal. But that's not what's going to kill you. What's going to kill you is a heat wave, and that's weather, and that's global heating. Now, I don't know exactly why the wind changed and brought so much hot air into Portland for people who completely were unaware that was going to happen or completely taken up by surprise. I don't, but global heating is going to change the wind patterns. That's what it will do. It's going to heat land masses and oceans in different ways that we haven't experienced, that have never happened since, I don't know, 3 million years ago. And it's going to change the way the winds blow. And the winds blow in our weather. And sometimes they're going to blow in storms that are just completely bonkers. And other times it's going to blow in hot air that's completely off the chart. And if you're up in Alaska, you're going to have a different experience of what happens to the weather than you do if you're down in San Diego. You have an even different experience of what's going to happen with the weather. And we can't say as a blanket statement that dry places get drier. Is that a problem? I don't know. Wet places get wetter. Well, sell more umbrellas. Okay, we have to admit that it's not anywhere as simple as that. It's just not. And it's also never going to be as simple as, oh, well, the climate changes all the time. We are going to start experiencing anomalous weather phenomena, plural, that are going to be abundantly lethal and destructive. Alaska, Canada, has been experiencing catastrophic fires, fires of a biblical nature up in the boreal forest. Why is that? The trees are dying. Some of it's because of bark beetles, but even the bark beetles are there because winters have changed. the weather in the winters has changed. It doesn't get as cold as it used to. And it used to kill the bark beetles and give the trees a chance to recover from the damage caused by bark beetles. And then, when spring rolled around, the trees were a little bit ahead, and the bark beetles would have to hatch and grow up and find trees and start burrowing, but the trees could always stay ahead of it. Now there's no cold anymore. The cold has stopped. Now that is a little bit of climate change, but then the rains have also stopped. Why? I don't know. I don't live up there. I don't know what's going on, but the forest is drying out. It's in transition, kinda like the same way that the Amazon is. An example of a boreal forest, which are, generally considered, high latitude rainforests, drying out, and then the fires come. Fires come, and the winds blow like crazy. They're saying that the fires are just like that's like they're alive. The wind is blowing, and it blows from this direction, and then suddenly it turns and blows from another direction, and, huge pyrocumulonimbus clouds going all the way up to the stratosphere, creating their own weather. It's just unhinged what happens up in Canada. They've had, like, 3 years running of increasingly desperate situation. Every year, it's worse than the year before. What's that about? Some of it's probably climate change. Yeah, their climate's probably changing. Some of it's just off the hook weather. Stuff is just happening up there. Lightning storms coming in, setting a bunch of fires, and the winds coming through and blowing the fires from left to right to center. And it's just completely out of control. That boreal forest has been there since the end of the last ice age, right? 20,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. And now it's probably all gonna burn. It's all gonna burn. What happened? I don't know. Global heating happened. I guess that's what happened. So that's all gonna go away. Yeah, it's probably all gonna go away. The entire boreal forest, uh, uh, in Canada, all the way up to the Arctic Circle, probably the entire thing, all of it, every acre nearly is gonna burn. That's just what's gonna happen. The last 3 years have been unbelievably bad. They've lost entire towns, not like within hours. Something similar is happening in California. Here in California on the coastal range, we have the redwood forest that California is famous for. Of course, we cut down most of the redwood trees, but we didn't cut them all down. We left some, but they're dying from the heat. There's no fog. The fog is gone. So there was a place that was wet from the fog, the coastal fog. And if you live anywhere in California, you've heard about the fog. Probably you've been in it, and it's dreary and it's cold and it soaks through to your bones and you're freezing all the time. And but that's what the trees needed. They were adapted to that. And now they don't get fog anymore. Why? I don't know. Global heating, I guess. Yeah, their climate is changing. And we get fires in California. Crazy fires. Absolutely insane. Can't even fight the fires. Don't know where to start. Can't even get around them. Containment, as they like to call it. These fires remain uncontained for weeks at a time, blowing in every direction possible. It's nuts. And that's what's going to happen to us. That's what's gonna happen. Not dry places getting drier and not really wet places getting wetter. I mean, you can justify that in terms of some aspects of global heating, of course, you can make an argument for those things, but that's not really what's happening, and that's not what's going to happen. And if you start talking like that, you kinda normalize the middle. "Oh, well, I don't live in a dry place. Oh, and I don't live in a wet place, so I should be fine. My normal should be even more normal, hyper normal, super normal." And it's not true. It's just not true. So we have to be very careful what narratives we accept and what things we say because that paints our expectations. And I have been watching people react to the threat of climate change, as the Chamber of Commerce likes to call it. They invented that term, by the way, climate change. Um, I've been hearing this for 20 years, along with everybody else, and it's not true. Climate change, if all you had was some climate change and your dry got drier and your wet got wetter and maybe things went sideways a little bit, you'd be lucky. You'd be lucky. That would be a great story. The dry places got drier, the wet places got wetter, and the rest of us were fine. That would be that would be like a non-issue. We could just ignore those people, let them suffer, because there's so few of them anyway. Nobody lives in the Amazon. Nobody lives in the Canadian boreal forest. Nobody lives in Siberia. Nobody lives on the Saudi peninsula. Are you what? How many people are we talking about here? 50? 100? I mean, that's the attitude people are copying about this. But it's not true. It's not true. Bogota, Colombia. How many people live in the capital city of Colombia? Uh, I don't know. Millions? The same thing's happening in Mexico City. Very similar situation. They live on a mountaintop. So they get rain, and that's how their water gets delivered. And Mexico City, uh, capital of Mexico, 40 million people live in one city or something like that. It's a huge number of people. Uh, are running out of water. How'd that happen? Weather. It's betrayed them. We're having an El Nino right now. Then we're going to have a La Nina. Uh, people like to blame what's happening with the weather right now in California and the West Coast, and even into the rest of the country. Oh, that's just El Nino. That's El Nino. It'll go away, and we'll be back to normal. And it's always like, yeah, it's just temporary. We'll be normal again. Donald Trump said the same thing. Yeah. It's what was he saying? It's cold right now, but it'll warm up again, or it's really hot right now, but it'll cool off. Don't worry. And there's just this normalcy bias that it's all going to return back, and maybe the climate will change, and maybe that's even a good thing. What winters will get warmer, summers will get cooler. I don't know. Make it up, right? You're just making it up. You're just imagining something that sounds pretty good, but that's not necessarily what it's going to be. We have to stop having this discussion among ourselves. Climate change would be a big win. Climate change would be a really great narrative story. Yeah, the climate change, but it took 100 years and we were able to cope. That's not what's going to that's not what's going to kill us. Weather, violence. I did a video, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago about how the Earth's dynamic system is becoming violent, and I presented it in exactly those terms. It's becoming violent, people. It's like, Mother Earth is waking up, and she's noticed what we've done, and we're about to get a spanking. It's getting violent out there. Did you notice? Yeah, that's what's most likely coming your way. Most likely is just violence. The Earth system is just gonna beat us to a pulp, probably. And yeah, your climate might change, and yeah, some dry places will get drier, and some wet places will get wetter, and more umbrellas, and the scorpions probably won't even notice. And then you're gonna get beat up. You're gonna get flattened. You and your house and your community are gonna get flattened by the violence. That's what's coming. So I have no beef with Michael Oppenheimer. We're all doing the same thing. I do it. I've done it in the past. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm very, very careful what I what expectations I allow myself to have about what's coming our way. And you should be too. You should be careful too. You We are off the chart, people. We are off the edge of the map, as they used to say. We are off the edge of the map. We are in terra incognita. We don't know where we're headed. We don't know how to get back to where we were. This map is no good anymore. Everything we thought we knew that would be eternal and sacred about the climate and the planet and the Earth system, throw it out the window, baby, because we're having to start all over again. Oh, and by the way, it's not even gonna settle down to something recognizably constant for hundreds of years. Wow. Good luck with all that. So don't forget to subscribe and like and notify and all that stuff. I'll be doing more readings from my story. It's been 100 days. Soon I have to write it, and because I'm doing these talks, it helps me to remember to write it. I do want to get it done. At that point, maybe I'll publish it on Amazon Books or someplace in final form, and you can enjoy it there for whatever 50 cents or something. That's all I got for you today. Uh, Stay cool.